each time, these decisions are made, it encourages Putin to think that the West is weak and divided, and therefore open to further probes and further tests by way of military force.
Germany's defence minister is planning to travel to Ukraine in the next few weeks, according to reports in German media this morning. Berlin is under increasing pressure after declining to send Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. An advisor to President Zelensky has said the indecision is killing Ukrainians. Richard Spencer is the Times correspondent in Ukraine and joins us this morning. Richard, good morning.
Good morning.
Let's start then with what feels like perhaps slight movement from the Germans, certainly, in terms of a visit from the defence minister. What should we read into this? How significant is it?
I think he's going to reassure President Zelensky personally of Olaf Scholz's commitment to the Ukrainian side in this war. Germany's behaviour and attitude to sending weapons, and in particular, as we know, tanks now, has caused a lot of consternation. Across all the sort of allies of Ukraine in this war, and fury in Ukraine itself. I mean, there isn't anyone sort of second to Mr. Putin, of course, who is more disliked in Ukraine now than Olaf Scholz, who's seen as constantly fumbling the ball on this particular issue. There is a theory that more was decided behind closed doors in Ramstein on Friday than was admitted, and that Mr. Scholz has a particular game he's playing on this tank issue, and it may be that there's some private message being sent, not for public consumption as well.
What could that be? What sort of game, what sort of strategy is Scholz potentially pursuing here?
Well, the theory that's being put about, I say not by the German government itself, but perhaps that's for obvious reasons. The theory that's being put out is that Germany does have this strong pacifist streak, for obvious reasons, given the history, and it has a fair number of sort of far-right groups that are openly supportive of Russia. So the theory is that Scholz is deliberately playing the long game to ensure that every move he takes, every step in terms of greater weaponry he's sending to Ukraine, he makes sure he has popular support. Otherwise, he's afraid that that Germany will turn against this whole project of supporting Ukraine. He hasn't agreed to send all these tanks, but apparently the Ukrainians will be sent to practice on these Leopard tanks anyway. So the theory is, well, he's going to send the tanks in a couple of months, but by that time they'll already be the soldiers will already be trained. There was no point in sending the tanks without training, so he hasn't actually lost any time by this gambit to make sure that the move, when it does come, has popular support. I mean, that's the theory. I don't know if that's really what he's thinking, but that's one theory, and maybe that's what he's going to. The defense minister is going to go off and reassure the Ukrainian government.
Yeah, and that's certainly logical. You can understand that. You can see the sense in that for sure. And by way of reassurance, it sounds like that is what is needed, given these quite strong comments from an advisor to President Zelensky of Ukraine, saying that the West's indecision over sending extra weapons to Ukraine is killing more of our people, which is pretty strong stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I spent last week, a couple of days last week, talking to tank brigades in Bakhmut, in the far east of the country, on the front line there. They were, obviously they say were very gung-ho and saying we'll beat the Russians, whatever you give us. But there was a lot of excitement about these tanks, and they thought they were going to get them. So there's a lot of disappointment now, and a couple of guys I was speaking to after this decision were saying, look, if every time it comes, throughout the recent history, not just in Ukraine, but going back to Ukraine in 2014, in Syria, in Georgia, in Chechnya, right back in the 90s and 2000s. If the West took action against Russia faster and earlier, we wouldn't be where we are now. And each time, these decisions are made, it encourages Putin to think that the West is weak and divided, and therefore open to further probes and further tests by way of military force.
Just in terms of where you are this morning, Richard, what is happening there? What's your sort of focus, and what are you looking at in the area in which you are based right now?
Well, I've been on the eastern side near Bakhmut for the last week. I've now come to Kharkiv, which is the big city to the northeast. I've got a couple of projects here. Kharkiv's interesting because it's where Ukraine's tanks were made back in the Soviet era, and Russia's tanks. Kharkiv used to be obviously was in the Soviet Union until 1991. It was at one stage it was the third biggest city in the Soviet Union, and the main industrial hub of Ukraine, and one of the two main military industrial hubs of the Soviet Union. It's where a lot of Russia's, one of the Soviet Union's missiles and tanks were made, include some of the tanks possibly that are now being used against Ukraine. So that's one of the things I'm going to be looking at.
Really interesting, Richard. We're always grateful for your time. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Richard Spence there, Times correspondent, reporting from Ukraine and explaining perhaps the strategy behind this delay, or apparent delay, in sending tanks to Ukraine. That actually Olaf Scholz of Germany has to shore up public support, given the difficulties with sort of intervening in war from a German perspective. And by shoring up public support and training Ukrainian troops on how to use the Leopard 2 tanks, you don't lose any time. But actually, in terms of the public perception of the support from Germany, it makes a lot of sense. You can understand that strategy. We'll keep an eye on it, of course.
In around half